In this episode, we'll be discussing the topic of the Great Apostasy. What is the Great Apostasy in the LDS doctrine, and biblically, is there a prediction of the Great Apostasy in the church? These questions and more will be talked about on today's episode. So what is the Great Apostasy? While the term was first coined during the Reformation to claim that the corrupt Roman Catholic Church at the time had fallen away from the true gospel and that this event represented a great apostasy or falling away from the truth. In more modern terms, this term is used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to denote a period of time spanning from the death of the apostles to Joseph Smith's restoration of the church in the 1800s. During this period of approximately 1800 years, good people and much of the truth still existed, but the fullness of the gospel as established by Jesus Christ was lost, according to the LDS website. During this large period in history, nobody had the fullness of the gospel. In the Book of Mormon, the Great Apostasy is seen as both a moral corruption that had come upon the church after the apostles died off, as well as a theological corruption, as many of the plain and precious truths were lost from the earth. The main purpose of the Book of Mormon then, according to 1 Nephi, was to restore these truths that had been lost during the Great Apostasy. So what were the things missing from the gospel? Well, here are just a few of the things from a list of 25 on the LDS Church website. These missing truths include things that the ancient church, even during the Great Apostasy, affirmed, such as Jesus being the perfect example for humankind, Jesus being the Savior of the world, and Jesus being the mediator between us and God. The list of truths, however, also contains things that the historic church was well aware of, but condemned as heresy, such as the Father having a fleshly body. In conclusion, this list contains a lot of missing truths that actually weren't missing, and have been affirmed throughout the centuries, calling into question the other parts of the list. So what kind of biblical evidence is there for the Great Apostasy? Some of the passages that the LDS website cited to support their position include Amos 8:11 and 2 Peter 2:2. In Amos 8:11, the prophet Amos is speaking on behalf of the God of Israel and saying that there will come a time when God's voice will not be heard in Israel. Seen out of context, this would seem like a great apostasy, and it sort of is. You see, this verse is talking about the Babylonian exile of Israel after Israel as a whole rejected God and didn't keep up their end of the covenant. In a sense, this is an apostasy event because Israel was being given over to their enemies, but not all of Israel had lost belief in God, as is seen in many faithful characters in the exile such as Jeremiah, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In 2 Peter 2:2, Peter warns the church about the false prophets. Simply citing false prophets, however, does not equal a great apostasy. There are many false prophets and teachers today, but many faithful teachers as well. One of the places in the scriptures where an apostasy event is apparent is in 2 Thessalonians 2:2-3, in mentioning the day of the Lord. It says that the day of the Lord will not come unless rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed. This is describing the end of times when an apostasy will occur, led by the Antichrist himself. So the Great Apostasy is real, right? Well, not so fast. In 2 Thessalonians, if you continue down to verse 8, you'll see that Jesus himself is the one who's going to end the apostasy event and establish his kingdom forever, not Joseph Smith. In Christian doctrine, there is no great apostasy in the same sense that an LDS person would describe the term. We can affirm that there was and still is a lot of moral corruption in the church, but this does not mean that everyone during this period of corruption was bad and that the gospel was lost during that time. In fact, there are some key passages in the Bible that suggest otherwise. In Matthew 16:18, Jesus tells Peter that he is establishing his church and the gates of hell will not overpower it. What a bold statement. Did Jesus really not know the direction of his church? Of course he did. And he could say this statement because he was God and was establishing a kingdom that he could not be overcome by evil. To say that the gates of hell did actually prevail against the church during the Great Apostasy would make Jesus a liar, or at the very least, misguided in his teaching. We also see that Jesus gives his followers a parable of his kingdom in Matthew 13. In this illustration, there is one growing season where the wheat and the tares, which represent those who reject the truth, are left to grow together. And then, at the end of the season, they are both harvested and sorted. Notice how there's only one growing season in God's kingdom? In a great apostasy model, there would have to be two growing seasons because of the gospel being lost in between. This parable, in tandem with the parable of the mustard seed Jesus also gives, paints a picture of a consistently growing kingdom and one growing season in which the powers of darkness cannot prevail against it. And and that is why, as Christians, we do not believe that the Great Apostasy occurred. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more episodes.